And a very good morning to you. This is the Talk of the Town. And the Talk of the Town today is reporting what the finance expert Murtaza Jafferjee had to say to Shami Russell-Dean on Face the Nation last night. Here's what he had to say in terms of the domestic debt restructuring.
So let me frame the problem. There has been an old adage that Sri Lanka has always been living far beyond its means, and that is the crux of the problem. So we have celebrated 75 years of independence, and if you look at the government's budget, except for 4 years, a couple of years in 2017 and 18 and a couple of years in the 1950s, we have been posting what is called a primary balance deficit, which means it is the government revenue minus expenditure without interest. So it is this accumulation of these primary balances over the years that created the foundation for the debt. Now, when you pile on debt, it will also attract interest, and this interest over time snowballs. So just as a saver is told that compound interest is your best friend, if you are a borrower, it's your worst enemy. So what has happened to Sri Lanka is that the debt has snowballed to a level where it is unsustainable relative to the size of the economy. And that has precipitated this debt crisis. To give you some examples, the debt, which is the public sector debt, which includes the central government and the guaranteed state-owned enterprises and the central bank, has been estimated by the IMF to be 128% of GDP. For a middle-income market country like Sri Lanka, market access country like Sri Lanka, the safe level should be around 70%. So we are way past any kind of red line, and the interest cost is currently about 6.5% of GDP, which is one of the highest in the world. There's another metric called gross financing needs, which is the amount of debt that comes due every year. For last year, that amount of debt was about 30% of GDP. So as per our IMF agreement, we have to bring that 30% of GDP down to 13% of GDP in 4 years, which means that the primary balance deficit, which was 4% last year, has to be flipped to 2.3% in 4 years' time. And the amount of debt that is coming due every year, which is estimated at 26% of GDP, has to be brought down to 15% of GDP. So these are the parameters under which this whole issue of debt and its restructuring is to be done. About 50% of this debt is externally owed because the currency depreciated by something like 60% from 200 to 320, and the balance is owed domestically. The domestic debt is mainly in the form of treasury bills, accounting for about 4.7 trillion, and bonds, which are more longer term securities, which total about 9 trillion. And there is some debt owed to the central bank, which is called provisional advances of about 400 to 500 billion. So this sums up the problem that there is an enormous amount of debt that your economy is carrying. And the best analogy I can give to your viewers is it's like some of us carrying a very large load on our head. Our ability to operate normally is significantly impacted the larger the load that we carry on our shoulder. And therefore, this load has to be reduced. And that is the premise of this debt restructuring. So the question is that who is going to participate in this adjustment is the question. There are two constituencies, as I spoke about the primary balance. One is that the tax revenues have to be significantly increased so that the primary balance can be brought to a surplus. The other is the debt holders to whom there are principal payments and periodic coupon payments and interest to be paid. They have to participate in some kind of restructuring where this can be more manageable amount by stretching out the time period, reducing some of the interest rates, and in a very selective cases, the principal amount owed may also have to be adjusted. So that, Shamin, sums up the problem.
When you say the principal amounts need to be adjusted, what does that mean?
So for example, if you have an instrument that has a face value of 100 rupees, which means at maturity you are going to get 100, and the interim period that you are going to get an interest payment, which for a debt security is called a coupon. In very selective cases, the principal may have to be adjusted. It will be more so for the commercial debt rather than the domestic debt. The external commercial debt may have to have some kind of principal adjustment, but unlikely for local debt.
So I was listening to one of your speeches lately, Murtaza, and you say that when it comes to domestic debt, it has to be proportionately divided amongst all, and that should be the premise in which the government should start acting. So that means when it comes to treasury bills, there needs to be a haircut. When it comes to treasury bonds, there needs to be a haircut. What percentage do you suggest?
So we have to be careful with the terminology that is used. When you normally use the terminology of haircut, that means you are adjusting the principal, and it is not necessarily at this stage that you will need to adjust the principal. So the definition of haircut may not be relevant, but what will be needed is that the maturities of these instruments. So what is called the average term to maturity, that if you take the totality of the bonds outstanding